Hey, I want to welcome you to our Sunday morning virtual worship service and ask you a question. If somebody handed you a Bible for the very first time and said, you ought to read this, just open it up anywhere and just start reading wherever you find yourself. And if you happen to open it up to Matthew chapter 10 and around verse 34, this is what you would read. Do not think that I came to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Well, then you're suddenly interrupted. Maybe your kids burst into the house bleeding, or there's a fire and you have to run out of the house, or there's a loud noise that suddenly distracts you and you put the Bible down and you never get back to it. What would your impression of Jesus be? This is a teaching of Jesus. Don't think that I came to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Maybe a few weeks after that, somebody asks you, hey, have you heard of this Jesus character and what do you think of him? What would your likely answer be? It might be something like, he sounds like a guy who came to start a revolution and to get people angry at each other. Seems like a kind of a harsh guy, actually, not very loving and certainly not very peaceful. The rest of the passage, and this is the passage we're looking at today in chapter 10, verses 37 through 39, Jesus says this, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. You know, there are certainly portions of Scripture and certainly some things that Jesus taught that make us want to stop short and say, hey, he said what? Like, what could that mean? Should I take that literally? Should I take that seriously? Some things sound kind of crazy at some points, don't they? Things like this. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your enemy strikes you on the cheek, turn and let her or him strike you on the other cheek as well. If someone sues you to take your shirt, give them your coat also. Sell all your possessions and give your money to the poor. If you call someone a fool, you will be liable to the fires of hell. Or what about this? When you go on a journey, don't take an extra pair of clothes or shoes. Don't take money. Don't take extra food. Just let God provide for you along the way, even where you're going to stay. Well, in any case, you take my point. Jesus says some things that aren't easy to just say, okay, I guess I'll go do that. Our summer series is titled, He Said What? Embracing the Teaching of Jesus, is going to look at some of these topics. You may be interested in turning a topic in, something you've thought about, questions you have about some bit of Jesus' teaching. We would welcome those topics. You can do that on your connection card virtually, or you can email us, or you can drop it off in hard copy form. But we'd welcome your topics. And, we'd love to hear the ones that you would like to hear something about. Now, we're not going to be able to put every topic on the list. We're not going to be able to get to every topic, but so we can't promise you we get to yours. But it would be interesting to see the topics that are interesting to you as we go through this series. Jesus said some challenging things, and he said challenging things really for everyone. Whatever slant you take on faith, whether you think of yourself as more liberal or more conservative, more grace-oriented or more truth-oriented, more legalistic, or maybe you have a more relaxed faith view, whether you are more drawn to a disciple-oriented approach to faith or a more social justice-oriented approach to faith, anyone who decides to follow Jesus and take Jesus seriously is going to have to wrestle with some of the things that Jesus said. The reality is that Jesus calls us to follow, but we're tempted to shape him in our own image. We're tempted to shape our own path of following Jesus. Voltaire, a French writer, historian, and philosopher who lived mostly in the 1700s, wrote this, in the beginning, God created man in his own image, and man has been trying to repay the favor ever since. Look, I suppose that when you work your way through following Jesus, when we work our way through following Jesus, we often arrive at the Jesus we think is the real one. That is to say, we come to follow the Jesus who resonates with our hearts most often. And perhaps our hearts are drawn to a gentle, loving, and docile Jesus. And it's not hard to see how that could happen, right? Jesus Jesus' heart was for the broken. Jesus gravitated towards those who were marginalized and outcast. He said, I didn't come for the healthy, but for the sick. I didn't come for the righteous, but for the sinners. Jesus certainly taught us to be peacemakers. Jesus was very critical of the power brokers, particularly of his religion. Jesus teaches us that he came to love the world and not to judge the world in John chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. Jesus has interactions with people like the woman caught in adultery, in which he comes to the conclusion, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. And so perhaps our hearts are drawn to that Jesus, or perhaps our hearts are drawn to a harsher version of Jesus, a Jesus who calls religious leaders out for their sin, who calls them snakes, vipers, whitewashed tombs. It's also not hard to see how that can happen. He did teach that he came not to bring peace, but a sword. He did say, if you don't hate your father and mother and brother and sister and children and even your own life, you can't be my disciple. He does actually come into the temple and start throwing the furniture around and whipping people to chase them out. He does talk about cutting off the unfruitful branches and casting them into the fire. He does, in fact, say that a judgment is coming in which he will separate out the sheep from the goats. Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. To the goats, he says, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. But to the sheep, he says, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, let me just say that my heart is drawn most to the first version of Jesus. That is the Jesus I prefer. In the circles that I've traveled in the past 10 years or so, there's a definite leaning into this Jesus. I would say a very progressive Jesus who's aligning nicely with where the culture around us wants us to go. And there's some truth there. There's some good stuff there. This is my favorite Jesus, my friend, my companion, my teacher, one who shows me unconditional love and acceptance. All of those things are true about Jesus. But maybe you're drawn to the second version of Jesus, and I don't say that as a criticism or a condemnation. It may just be the way that you see Jesus and you live out your faith. He's calling us higher. He's calling us out. And if we don't measure up, he's going to call us on that. There are standards against we are going to be judged or measured. There are things that are unacceptable, and being counterculture is a high value. Jesus certainly was countercultural. And so we see those things were true about Jesus as well. One of the challenges that we face as followers of Jesus is to continually challenge our own ideas of who we think Jesus is with what he actually taught. Now, let me say this at this point, as matter-of-factly as I can, that I take it to be true that we have a fair representation of what Jesus actually taught in the Gospels. That is to say, I think there are many people who would say, well, Jesus didn't really say that he was going to send the goats into the eternal fire. And you can go to that place where you just decide anything you don't really like that Jesus said, you just dismiss it. You wouldn't be the first person to do that, and I dare say you won't be the last. Maybe you've heard about the Jefferson Bible, edited by Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States of America. The Jefferson Bible included no signs of Jesus' divinity and no miracles. There were 2 volumes, The Philosophy of Jesus of Nazareth and The Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. Jefferson edited out the biblical passages he considered kind of over the top or that offended his Enlightenment era sense of reason. Now, that was certainly one way of approaching the scriptures and specifically the Gospels. The struggle here is how we decide which parts to hold on to and which parts to throw away. It's to decide which parts we like and we want to say yes to, and the parts that we want to say, no, I don't think Jesus said that. Because it's going to be difficult to come to an honest rendering of what Jesus said and taught and did. It becomes, in some ways, arbitrary. I know that we want to do it, and I know that we want to push back on the parts that don't resonate with us, but it's really important for us to continue to challenge ourselves to understand what Jesus said. You know, Jesus wasn't our idea, and we don't get to shape him into our image. And he knew that was going to cause problems and challenge us. And he knew that his call to follow him would be by nature divisive. And that's just the case of Jesus' call. It will be, by nature, divisive. Let's return to the text of Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36, where Jesus says, "Do not think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I've come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household." So now when we say that we're going to take Jesus seriously, we don't always mean that we're also going to take Jesus literally. Maybe not in every case. For instance, there are no gospel accounts of Jesus with an actual sword. We never see Jesus wielding a sword. We don't ever see or hear that Jesus had a sword. And so if you want to make the case that Jesus is saying we should all take up arms, that's going to be a difficult case to make. I mean, this text is not an argument for you as a follower of Jesus to buy more guns and to get a concealed carry permit. Now, I'm not saying as a follower of Jesus you can't have guns or a concealed carry permit. That's just not the point here. There are a few places where we see Jesus and in a context where weapons are there, or where he talks about what the weapons will look like. Think about the places where Jesus pushes back. In John chapter 18, verse 36, Pilate is asking Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus is trying to describe to him, to clarify to him that, yeah, I am a king, but not of the sort of kingdom that you're thinking about. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews." Now, the implication here is that Jesus' followers are not carrying weapons, or if they are carrying weapons, they're not carrying them so that they can overthrow the government in a militaristic sort of way. He's not going to bring his kingdom into place by force. You'll probably also remember the little incident when Jesus is being arrested. Actually, it's just a little bit earlier in John chapter 18 as well. They came to arrest Jesus. In verse 10, it says, "Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. So Jesus said to Peter, 'Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?'" This is one of the texts that, like, if you never want to be there for something, right? This would have been a really good one to be there for. Peter, they come to arrest Jesus. Peter whips out his sword, which he's carrying, obviously. He cuts off the high priest's servant's right ear. And Jesus says, "No, Peter, that's not what we're doing." He picks up the ear and he puts it back on. And I think it's just a fascinating story. So when Jesus says he didn't come to bring peace but a sword that would divide families, he's saying quite clearly that his teachings would be the thing that would create division. That his call would be something that would create division. Because the call of Jesus will by nature be divisive. In Matthew chapter 4, verses 21, when Jesus is calling the first disciples, we see him call James and John by the sea, and they're working with their father, and he says, "Follow me." I'm guessing that caused a little bit of trouble in that family. Here's what the text says. "And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, in a boat with their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him." How would that have gone over if you were working with your mom or your dad? "Hey, thanks for including me in the family business, but I'm going to take off right now because I'm going to follow this itinerant wannabe Messiah around and see how that works out." That probably would have created a little bit of upheaval in your family. And I'm guessing that it created some in James and John's family as well. This is the call of Jesus, and they immediately drop their nets and follow him. And it's life-changing, it's life-altering, not just for them, but for their family business. When Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me," he's saying something pretty divisive. Jesus isn't saying any way is good enough. He's not saying that there's lots of ways to the Father. He says, "No one comes to the Father except through me." And he doesn't just say that once. He says that he's the door of the sheep, and all who enter have to enter into that door. Anybody who climbs over the side is a thief and a robber. There's just one way in. When Jesus says that we are to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, and we're supposed to turn the other cheek and give our stuff away and not put ourselves first, he is teaching what is by nature a very divisive message. It's going to separate people from each other. And I don't probably have to spend any more time describing that to you, because if you've been following Jesus for very long, you will have your own stories, most likely, unless everyone in your family group and friend group is following Jesus in just the way you are. There are going to be times when it creates division, when it creates a separation. Jesus can be divisive even in families where everyone in the family is a follower of Jesus, because we don't always hear him the same way. A couple of weeks ago, we were blessed to have Dr. Liz Troutman with us here at Moses Lake Christian Church, who was talking about the call of God on her life to go to Zambia. And she said that when she first told her family that she was moving to Zambia to work with children, she didn't have the support of her family. Nobody thought that was a good idea. They weren't on board with her. Now, I know Dr. Troutman's family, and they're followers of Jesus, and over time, they've come to support her in this call. But this could have been a place where division could have been created. But at the same time, Dr. Troutman knew that she was being called. That was clear to her. It's very clear to her, and so she's going to go through that. But there was a high potential there to create a breakup in family relationships. And that happens when Jesus calls us. There are times when we have to follow his call, no matter what that means in our family or our friend group. When it comes down to it, Jesus' call to follow is unapologetically to an undivided allegiance. That's his call. That's why Jesus goes on to say in Matthew 10:37 through 39, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross up and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. You know, Jesus doesn't really offer us the option of following him as a hobby or with our leftover time, or if it suits our fancy or fits with our plans. He doesn't call us to follow him only when we're comfortable or the people around us agree with us. Jesus' call to follow isn't just a call to follow as long as it doesn't offend anyone or our cultural surroundings. And we want to be careful, and we want to be thoughtful, and we want to be discerning, and we want to be wise. But Jesus calls us to an undivided allegiance. You know, the early Christians weren't burned alive and crucified and beheaded because they liked the philosophy or the morals of Jesus of Nazareth. They were martyred because they believed, as Jesus taught them, that he was the Messiah and the only way to life and into the kingdom of God. Jesus doesn't say, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Or there's a bunch of other ways you can find real rest as well. He doesn't give options. And again, taking Jesus seriously does not always mean taking Jesus literally. In Luke chapter 14, verse 26, we get another account of Jesus' words like the one in Matthew chapter 10. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, we know that what Jesus is not saying here is that we should actually hate people, that we need to be attentive to really loathing other people. We know that Jesus is about love, and he is clear about that. And so we need to be attentive to good biblical interpretation. We have to read Scripture widely and understand it in its context. But we do know that what he's saying is, if that we're going to follow him, we can't love anyone or anything else more than him. He's not giving us that option. He is calling us unapologetically to an undivided allegiance in this text. And Jesus says that's the pathway to life. And we can want to soften it. We can want to push off the things we don't like and draw close to the things we do like. But in reality, we have to be careful students of what Jesus taught and what he did and how he interacted with people so that we might follow what he actually said to the best of our ability. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his classic work, The Cost of Discipleship, writes about what he calls cheap grace. Much has been made of this, but he makes good points. He says cheap grace means grace sold on the market like Cheap Jack's wares. The sacraments, the forgiveness of sin, and the consolations of religion are thrown away at cut prices. Grace is represented as the church's inexhaustible treasury, from which she showers blessings with generous hands without asking questions or fixing limits. Grace without price, grace without cost. The essence of grace, we suppose, is that the account has been paid in advance, and because it's been paid, everything can be had for nothing. Since the cost was infinite, the possibilities of using and spending it are infinite. What would grace be if it were not cheap? Cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance. It's baptism without church discipline. It's communion without confession. Absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate. Jesus' call here is to a life utterly devoted to him above every other thing, including family, including friends, including our own comfort. So wait, did Jesus really say he was bringing a sword? Well, he did say that. Because his call will necessarily cut us off from all other allegiances to give our attention to following him. Doesn't mean we're not going to have friends and we're not going to have family, but our first allegiance has to be to him. And so saying yes to following Jesus is an oath of allegiance to him first, above every other thing and all that we have and all of the people that we know. And that will necessarily at times divide us from others. So, what version of Jesus are you following? What parts of your discipleship needs to be challenged or pushed a little bit? What are you overemphasizing? Maybe what are you underemphasizing? So we want to take some time this summer to look at the teaching of Jesus, some of which, when we hear them, can cause us to exclaim, he said what? Like, really? And so here's some questions to reflect on just for a few moments and then a couple action steps. First of all, are you following the actual Jesus or a version of Jesus you like better than the actual one? I know we're always going to be working that out. We're always going to be moving in that direction. So I'm not saying have you arrived or not arrived. My sense is that we're never going to arrive. But are you taking seriously all that Jesus said? Or what are some of the things that Jesus said that you're wrestling with? I mean, wrestling is good. It's healthy. It helps us to grow. It makes us stronger. What are you wrestling with? And then are things that Jesus said that you dismiss because it doesn't fit your preconceived narrative and the story that you want to live out? Do you dismiss it because it doesn't fit with the culture that we're living in right now? That we need to be careful about. And are you ready to authentically confront yourself and work through some of these topics? It's really important to take Jesus seriously, to look at and embrace the things that he taught and work through them. And so we're going to do that. And I want to invite you to do that. What are the things that Jesus taught that you're struggling with? What are the things you dismiss? And how are you going to work those things through? And then we want to invite you to take the summer reading challenge with us. We're going to read through the Gospels this summer as a church. We're going to start on June the 7th in the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll read a chapter a day. There's a couple days where we'll read half a chapter, but really pretty much a chapter a day between June 7th, this coming Monday, and September the 18th, which is the Saturday before our fall kickoff when we'll start moving back into the building. There'll be a reading for each day. You can get that off of our church app or off of the website. We can email it to you. We can give you a hard copy. We'd love for you to commit to read through the Gospels, one chapter a day. Taking Sundays off, we'll be together for worship on those days. And just examine the teachings of Jesus and the way that he interacted with people. I hope you'll take that challenge with us. And it'll be a great time to have over the summer as we do worship on the lawn. And I hope you'll join us. It's good to be with you, and God's grace be with you as you go into whatever is coming up in this next week. Take care.